Have you ever wondered, when a family completely breaks down, who's actually to blame? Is it the rebellious teenager acting out, maybe the distant, disconnected father, or the overly critical mother? It's a supernatural human instinct to just point fingers, right? We want to look for a scapegoat. But what if I told you that in the eyes of a modern family therapist, the villain isn't a single person at all? Instead, the true culprit is actually the hidden systemic pattern playing out just beneath the surface.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a really fascinating journey into the therapist's toolkit, specifically giving you a Chapter 6 overview of these concepts. We are going to completely demystify family therapy and look closely at how modern clinicians actually assess and treat highly complex family systems. We're essentially lifting the curtain on the psychological frameworks that guide a therapist's every single move, which totally transforms our understanding of how human beings relate to one another.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at assessing the family. Then, object relations and holding. Third, Bowen's multi-generational systems. Fourth, Satir's human validation process. And finally, we'll wrap up with the postmodern therapy shift. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Assessing the Family, and how therapists go about gathering the data.
So before a therapist can ever hope to fix what's broken, they've got to build a rock-solid foundation of understanding. And modern therapists rely heavily on qualitative assessment strategies to do this. They aren't just handing out standard multiple-choice tests. Instead, the field has totally shifted toward observing interactional patterns right there in the room. They're observing the family's structure and hierarchy, looking at who speaks for whom and who actually holds the power. They use interventive interviewing, and they construct these incredibly detailed multi-generational family maps called genograms. They note real-time interactions too. For instance, how do family members respond to clinical questions together? Who interrupts? Who just stays silent? And importantly, this whole data gathering phase is deeply tied to a modern paradigm shift toward clinical accountability. Therapists use these qualitative tools not just to diagnose a problem, but to continually measure outcomes, making sure their interventions are actually breaking those maladaptive patterns.
Moving right along to Section 2, the psychoanalytic lens, focusing specifically on object relations and holding. Once all that vital data is gathered, therapists apply specific psychological lenses to decode it. One major framework here is object relations counseling. This was pioneered by the brilliant husband and wife team, David and Jill Scharf. And this brilliantly illustrates their core philosophy, using the really powerful metaphor of a family as a garden. Think about it. The environmental needs like clean air and water are comparable to the social provisions required for family health. The fences protecting the garden, those are the family boundaries. The fertilization of the ground is the family's shared capacity to support each other, and the customized care for different plants represents the individual care needed for each unique family member. In this model, the therapist is not the gardener. The family as a whole is the gardener. The therapist is literally just a consultant, called in to help the family tend to their shared soil when they get stuck. To help tend this garden, the therapist's primary function is to create what's known as a holding space. This is a specialized emotional environment that gets activated through deep, active listening and the really careful tracking of affect or emotional cues. Think of it like a highly secure container where family members can safely express their absolute deepest needs and fears. The ultimate goal here is to help family members reintegrate repressed, projected parts of themselves back into their own identity. So instead of projecting their anxiety or anger onto a spouse or a child, blaming them for their own internal stress, they actually learn to own those feelings right in the here and now of the therapy session.
But how exactly does the therapist pull this off? Well, as the Scharfs state, interpretation is the workhorse of the object relations approach. The therapist adopts a stance of optimal visibility. They act almost as a blank screen. This allows family members to naturally project their unresolved early childhood relationships onto the therapist, a process you might know as transference. The therapist then carefully uses interpretations of this transference to make the family's unconscious patterns completely conscious. This gives the family the profound insight they desperately need to clear their own blockages and get back on a healthy developmental track.
Next up is Section 3, the systemic lens, where we'll look at the work of Bowen and Satir. Shifting gears from those deep psychoanalytic waters, we can compare two absolute titans of family therapy. They both shared a systemic view, but they utilized completely different tool sets. First up, Murray Bowen's natural systems theory. This offers a highly analytical approach uniquely rooted in evolutionary biology. Bowen assessed families by mapping multi-generational patterns across decades.
He actually introduced critical concepts that we still use today, like triangles. You know, that dynamic where two conflicted family members rope in a third person just to diffuse their tension. He also studied emotional cutoff, and he taught that the ultimate goal of therapy is the differentiation of self. That's the ability to remain emotionally connected to your family without sacrificing your own individual identity. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the stark contrast between Bowen's highly analytical mapping and Virginia Satir's human validation process model. Satir's approach was deeply personal, highly emotion-driven, and built entirely on the belief that clinical techniques were always secondary to the genuine human relationship she was able to establish with the family right there in the room. Satir outlined 6 linear phases in her therapeutic process. It all begins with making contact, literally reaching out with her hands, eyes, facial expressions, and a super inviting tone of voice. Then she moved smoothly through validating, facilitating awareness, promoting acceptance, making changes, and finally reinforcing those changes. She definitely didn't sit back detached with a clipboard. She prioritized personal involvement, physical touch, and active engagement, often using things like humor and drama to mirror the client's deepest and best qualities. Satir really brought a profoundly human element to the therapist's toolkit. As she so beautifully put it, "For me, vitality and self-worth are related to health. That is the manifestation of our spirituality." She firmly believed that emotional honesty and congruence were deeply, deeply connected to a person's vitality. Healing, in her view, wasn't just some clinical outcome to check off a list. It was a spiritual and human awakening within the entire family system. Which brings us to Section 4, the postmodern therapy shift, focusing on solution-focused and narrative therapies.
As we move much closer to contemporary practices, we hit an era that introduced radical changes, literally flipping how therapists view problems and solutions upside down. Traditional therapy models, like the psychoanalytic lens we discussed earlier, are heavily built on finding root causes, diving deep into historical family exploration, and making clinical diagnoses. Well, solution-focused therapy abandons that completely. It operates on the radical premise of no cause and effect. Instead of hunting endlessly for the origin of trauma, the therapist slows the pacing way down and focuses entirely on identifying small, highly achievable goals in a secure environment. The focus is strictly on the future and the solution, not the past and the problem.
Alongside this is narrative therapy. This is a social constructionist approach developed by Michael White and David Ebston. Narrative therapy fundamentally shifts the power dynamic in the room by utilizing a de-centered position. What this means is the therapist steps right down off that pedestal of being the all-knowing expert. Instead, they take a collaborative stance where the therapist and client work together to separate the person from the problem. They literally deconstruct and rewrite the limiting stories the family has been telling about themselves, actively constructing a brand new reality. So, the crucial point we want you to take away from this is that modern family therapy is absolutely not a single, rigid method. It's a highly adaptable toolkit. As we bring all these distinct theoretical lenses together, we can see how they build on each other. Assessment first maps the family structure. Object relations tends to the emotional garden soil using holding and interpretation. Bowen maps the deeply embedded multi-generational patterns. Satir steps in to validate the raw human experience, and postmodernism empowers families to completely rewrite their own stories moving forward. We've covered some incredible ground today, exploring how experts decode and heal human relationships. So, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought. Which of these lenses could help uncover the hidden patterns in your own family garden? Take a moment to consider how these distinct psychological frameworks might actually apply to the relationships in your own life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the patterns around you.